Good evening, YouTube, and once again, welcome to the snowy mountains and the dwarf holds. Yes, but this time it's not me playing. Yes, we're still on a dwarf kick. I figured what you all need, because I have opinions about the dwarves, and I have a way that I play the game. And those opinions are just that, they're opinions. And the way that I play the game is just that again. The way that I play it. Other people play the game different. Sometimes better, sometimes worse. In this case, I'm hoping to show you something different. In most of my battles with the dwarves recently, I had kind of small, rather aggressive armies that focused on having a lot of leadership, like Gotrek, Felix, Runelord, all this other stuff put together. This is a very different kind of dwarf army with a whole bunch of different types of units, arranged in a checkerboarded, kind of like zone defense type of army. What do you mean by that, Air? Well, zone defense, right? So if you take it, it's kind of like a sport where you cover a certain zone. The miners have these zones out here in front of them with their blasting charges, and then you can see that there are going to be damage arcs out here where all the artillery is working. So all this zone out here is covered. You know, if I make a circle, it's kind of big. All that's covered. If you get inside to the blob, these guys have a defense area right here that they're covering, along with the Runelord, who has his Wrath and Ruin. He can slow people down. And then if those high-value targets come in looking for the Runelord, look who's waiting. A Trollhammer Torpedo, an Iron Drake. So anybody bursting through the outer defense finds themselves getting damaged. You have units in the back protecting the back lines. They've got lines of fire with the Thunderers out here, able to shoot back into it. So there's basically a big dwarf on zone defense army here. So there's going to be 4 Thunderers. We've got a couple of Quarrelers, Iron Drake, Trollhammer, Iron Drakes, and then we've just got a bunch of Dwarf Warriors and Miners for the infantry, and a Runelord, and a couple of Bolt Throwers. Now this is going to be up against a High Elf army. And I want this battle to be an example of something, and I'll explain that in just a moment. The High Elves have brought a couple of Eagle Claws because they're decent against artillery. The problem is that Dwarf artillery most of the time will outrange them. Nice choice of support here. The Handmaiden is going to give more frequent fire to the Eagle Claws, and thus they get more damage. You can see that right now the White Lions are all hiding behind this berm to protect themselves from Dwarf artillery fire. Again, a very solid choice. Tyrion trying to make himself a smaller target for the dwarves, and then an Aethelmar chariot because chariots tend to abuse dwarves. Now these dwarves also have a gyrocopter. What this does is it gives them the ability to try and force an enemy up closer to their artillery box, especially when you have a shorter range artillery unit, such as the Bolt Throwers. The Bolt Throwers are shorter range. Sorry, I gotta get these names right. A Bolt Thrower, yes, and then we have the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower. The Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower has slightly greater range than the Dwarf one. So we're gonna see it firing away over there, and I do believe the Eagle Claw Bolt Throwers may be just a hair better. A hair better. There's gonna be some Sisters of Avalorn here. Now, I do feel like that the Sisters of Avalorn are kind of a questionable pick versus the Dwarves because all of them have an innate magic resistance. And the Sisters, while armor-piercing and long range, they fire magical ammunition. So I don't know that that is a great choice against the Dwarves. Look at this. Every unit has some built-in magic resistance. 25% for the Runelord. Let's see if we can get the Gyrocopter. 25%. I think the Runelord may give that buff to the whole army. So a quarter of the Sisters' damage is negated, and that's if their arrows get past a shield. So I do believe that pick is questionable in this matchup. Now that said, your pick needs to be good when you're facing the dwarves, and part of the reason I want to show this battle is because the dwarf player, in this case I believe is Aristodemos. It's not the name you're going to see on here, but he's the one that put this up on my Discord. He feels like the dwarves are actually probably too strong, and if anything, they need a little nerf. And he was playing these battles with Pratani, who's another member of my community, and I wanted to show a couple of these different battles to give you all an idea why he may be thinking that. So in this case, let's take a look at the matchup. The High Elves brought a bunch of mostly smart things for killing dwarves, right? Armor-piercing infantry, Tyrion, he's armor-piercing, relatively hard to kill, a little bit of artillery to help give some range, chariots, because they abuse them, Handmaiden, armor-piercing, right? None of these picks, except for, I'll say the Sisters of Avalorn, probably not awful picks in and of themselves, but this is a relatively small elite army that has to take out a relatively large army of dwarves. Now, I did tell you all the other day that one of the things the dwarves definitely have going for them is that even their cheap infantry come with high armor. And they all have pretty solid leadership. Almost all of their units coming with shields unless they're carrying a great weapon or like an Iron Drake. And that's a big deal because it adds a lot of melee defense, and it means they're going to stay in a fight longer even though their melee attack is somewhat atrocious. And you can see that this army is actually put together in order to take advantage of the dwarf strengths here, and that is, he's not playing to their infantry. The infantry are the weak units here. They're just meant as kind of a holding unit or distraction. The damage output of this dwarf army is all in its skirmishers. And granted, these picks are going to have to depend on the faction you're playing, but in this case, clearly the dwarf player felt like he could take these picks, and that basically, yeah, my infantry may lose a little bit if I let them go 1-to-1, but they're not going to be 1-to-1. There's going to be all kinds of support flooding in. I've got gyros, I've got iron drakes, I have quarrelers, I have flamethrowers, I have torpedoes, I've got thunderers. All of that stuff is going to do the damage. And then on top of that, you've got bolt throwers. And so basically the dwarves are just outputting a tremendous amount of ranged damage in this case. Now you're going to see here the White Lions trying to find a flank. They don't want to go headlong into all the dwarf skirmishing, but it's infantry. It won't be too terribly difficult for them to turn. And then whenever you face this much dwarf skirmishing, it can get difficult. How do you properly react to this? Look, the dwarves close the distance. Now their bolt throwers are firing, and now their skirmishers are also firing. So being willing to move, even though you're a relatively immobile faction, and then see how much he's spreading and controlling such a huge zone of the map. So this is a very different style, and can be a very effective style of playing the dwarves. I've come up against armies like these, and I'll go ahead and admit, I typically lose to these type of dwarf armies. Number one, I'm usually not built to fight them very well, and army pick is a big deal. But even when you are built to fight them, they can be tough, because really what the dwarf player has to do here now is just watch his lines of fire and make sure that the missile units are dealing the damage to the right target at the right time. So you can see Tyrion moving in here, and he's being held back by cheap miners while some units try and output some damage. The Rune Lord stays in the middle. He can control whatever gets in. Maybe the most frightening unit that gets in, he can control it early. The Mage, Lore of Shadows, is just getting wrecked trying to get anywhere near the dwarf line because there are so many overlapping fields of fire. Look at this. Look. Thunderers. Quarrelers that could potentially fire. Torpedoes. More Thunderers. And then you got blasting charges right here. So again, the damage output is a result of the way the dwarf is deployed and the combination of units. So this is kind of a combined arms effort here. Again, the High Elf Infantry is superior to anything here on the field. Might even be able to win it, but they're not going to be fighting alone. You can see that the miners here slowing down the charge. And Iron Drakes, a lot of people underestimate their capability. A lot of people say, oh, they're no good against armor. That is simply not true. And they also have the burnt effect, which drops leadership. Iron Drakes aren't made to be an anti-armor weapon, but they just have a lot of missile damage. And if you get in a compact formation, they will burn you up, armor or not. And you can see that's exactly what's happening. Look how much damage the White Lions took as a result of those Iron Drakes. And then watch this. If you ever wanted to see just an absolute execution, well, Tyrion just got hit with the Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin. He's being torpedoed, he's being shot, and then he goes down in a hail of fire extremely quick. Extremely quick. Look at that. He just gets roasted off the one Wrath and Ruin. So you can see here that the idea is, no matter what the elves are trying, if anything breaks through, it'll actually take even more damage than it would being outside the circle, depending on how well the dwarf player can turn their units to support. So, not a ton of kills, but a lot of damage dealt on these Iron Drakes. It's not showing up necessarily in the power bar, but there were some good shots. It's always better when you can get these units to the flank, but the dwarves are just attempting to deal all the damage they can deal. Tyrion is dead. The Handmaiden won't be long for this world. The Etheomar Chariot gets shot down. So pretty much every crucial unit for the High Elves has been shot, and you can see that the Mage is being chased by the gyrocopters. They're attempting to hold it in place so it can be torpedoed, and they succeed. So again, nice use of a combined open formation type dwarf army here. Something that I'm not very good at. And you know what? sitting here making commentary to play devil's advocate to my theories, right? Because I've seen that a lot of you don't agree with me, and that's fine. That's why I'm showing these. Try and give you all some voice here, too. To play devil's advocate, part of the reason why I might be frustrated at Dwarves is because my style of play doesn't fit them. I mean, you think about my style of play, I'm not a heavy micromanagement type of player. I'll continue this conversation as we start up a new battle. Alright, this is the second battle, and I will continue the conversation we're having about how it may just be me, right, that makes the Dwarves not feel good. And it's an important conversation, but let's hit what's here. This is a Greenskin versus Dwarves. Same players. It's just that Pertani now playing as the Greenskins. He's got Grimgore, a couple of Black Orcs way in the back, a Vanguard deployment of Gobos in order to get in the face of the Dwarves really quickly. Morgrub's Mangy Marauders. We've got a Gobbo Big Boss here, and we got Squig Hoppers surrounding all the outside so that they have some armor-piercing anti-skirmisher units. For the Dwarves, it is a front line of miners with blasting charges. Again, the same type of zone of control type deployment and formation here. You can see it. Just a big defensive geometry, literally. And there's iron breakers now in the second line of it. So this is going to be a massive zone of control. Why would the Dwarves do this against the Greenskins? Well, one of the things the Greenskins have going for them is WA. It's going to make their charge extremely powerful. If while you are charging, you are dealing with a hail of blasting charges, well, your charge is going to be a whole lot less effective. So this Dwarf army is well chosen. Anything that attacks from the front will take tremendous damage from the skirmishers and the miners and iron breakers. And then the back line, again, is just meant as a holding. You can see that there's not a bunch of fancy torpedoes or anything, but we do have a couple of gyrocopter units, this time the steam variant, because the Greenskins do have a bunch of low armor units, and armor, no armor, the steam variant's still pretty good against blobbed infantry. And there's still, yet again, a Rune Lord with just the Wrath and Ruin to control any fast-moving units that he might need to, or critical units. Let's hit play, and let's continue the conversation while you watch this battle play out a little. So, my play style usually relies on me picking a faction that allows me to pick an army that will give me the flexibility to potentially win a battle, or I try and pick an army that will be so good or so well picked that it basically wins a battle for me. I know that my strength isn't typically in micromanaging an army to victory. It is picking a solid build and taking my chances that that build will give my opponent enough fits and that my micromanagement will be good enough to get me where I need to be, right? Doesn't have to be championship quality. And that is a way to play the game in Warhammer 2. And if you come up against players who are really good at picking and micro, you'll probably lose. If you come up against players who aren't necessarily great at picking and you picked the right build, you'll probably win. And so that's the way that you can play the game, and that's the way I do play it. And so my Dwarf armies, with that mindset, probably aren't being chosen well to play to all their strengths, and then I find myself frustrated because the Dwarves aren't playing the way I want them to. Now, I'm not saying that I all of a sudden believe this, but I'm giving this as a counter-argument, and I think that there is certainly some validities to it. And just wanted to throw this out there because, again, I know some of you disagree with me. And you know what? A little healthy disagreement is good. When people start having a conversation about how the game plays and what they think of the factions, sometimes people will counter-argue, and you don't like what they say, and they may be wrong. Sometimes they counter-argue, and they may have some really good points. And I love how there's multiple battles here that were posted, and all of them some pretty good examples of some of the strengths of the Dwarves. Now, in this case, the Greenskin pick was pretty versatile. It got into combat very quickly with the Dwarves, and initially it took a ton of damage. And you can see that the Dwarves are also dealing a ton of damage in return to the Greenskins. That said, though, the Greenskins are surviving that initial damage, and now they have a lot of units regrouping. And here comes a potential downside for this type of Dwarf build, is when you just get too many units through your lines, and you're not able to focus them out anymore, and now your skirmishers become a big liability. It's a risk with this army. However, I think there were 4 replays that were submitted between these two players, and 3 of the 4 of them went to the Dwarves rather handily. In this battle, I won't ruin it yet. Maybe I already did by the way I'm casting. But the Greenskins are going to fight very well. And I wanted to show a little bit of both here, because I'm trying to balance through this. But again, in fairness, it wasn't balanced. The dwarves won 3 of the 4 engagements. All right, I've done ruined it at this point, but this is more for conversation's sake, right? Not necessarily just for the intensity of this battle. So the Greenskins here able to rally up their forces after an initial punishing defeat at the hands of the dwarves. And now, because the black orcs were held in the back, they come in, they'll fight very well. But you can see, like I said, the dwarves still going to cause a lot of damage. It's what they do. These gyrocopters up here doing a lot of damage. Some of the gyrocopters have gotten a pretty tremendous number of kills. Look at that, 70 kills. And that gyrocopter, this one over here, is in a position doing a lot of damage to black orcs. And then this gyrocopter over here, 88 kills. They're getting work done. The Mangy Marauders now punishing them for that work. And then the Squig Hoppers, look at that, 61 kills. Nice, 80 kills. On another. Squig Hoppers, very effective units at getting a hold of dwarf skirmishers. Their leadership is poor, but the damage and anti-infantry bonus they have is good. And it can be quite devastating. So you can see those steam guns able to work mostly at will here against the DAWI, though this one, like I said, is being slowly killed by the Mangy Marauders. It's just staying on station. Bit of a micro mistake, or intentional, trying to damage a key unit for the Greenskins here. I didn't see it the entire time it was there, but like I said, this is kind of the risk of that zone dwarf-type army with the checkerboard formations. If you get broken up enough, there's going to be a lot of squishy innards there. However, even sometimes when you do get broken up, that high armor, the high defense, will sometimes allow you to pull through as the dwarves. And it's just something that some factions don't have. It's definitely an advantage for them. So that's part of the reason why I wanted to play dwarves all week. I want to get better, and I'm really glad that Aristodemos and Pertani played these and sent them in, because I think this will help me play the dwarves better and understand them better. So I think the moral of the story here is I don't mind sharing my opinions. I like sharing it with you all, and I hear a lot of good feedback. So, like, I think Wicked was another one who I think kind of disagreed with some of my points about the dwarves, was okay with others. But Aristodemos here was making a point that he kind of thinks the dwarves are pretty good as they are, and that if you bring any buffs to them, even though I think they're small, in the hands of someone more skilled, may make them too good. Because they already have some very innate, unique things about themselves. Like I said, namely the armor and the leadership. Get a shot of those gyrocopters looking pretty awesome there. There are a few black orcs left, and they are trying to get over here to these slayers. Those are the dragonback slayers. Bit of a charge here from the Mangy Marauders. Definitely not going to be effective into the dragonback slayers. They may have just been trying to hold them for a second so that the black orcs can arrive. And the Gobbo Big Boss comes to join this attack, which I think is a pretty questionable decision. He's the kind of target that these dragonback slayers will absolutely excel against. They're going to poison it. They're unbreakable, and they get specific anti-large against a unit that is not tremendously armored. Only 45 armor. And then the Rune Lord is in there to support too now. However, Grimgor is alive, and the dwarves just don't have anything left that can kill Grimgor at this point. They lost all their Thunderers, and again, that's the weakness of these armies. You lose a couple of those key units, you're gonna be in trouble. And it's because those units are the only ones that can really deal the damage for the dwarves. All the rest of your units are just meant to prolong the battle so that those units can do their job. You see here that the black orcs are sent packing, and also the goblin big boss sent packing, while the greenskins continue to clean up the rest of the dwarves over here. Nice use of the gyrocopter to clean up the rusty airs over there, and we're going to end up with kind of a final fight here in the middle. Nice play to keep the Rune Lord out of the fight. Let your Dragonback Slayers tank as much of this damage as they can. Try and get rid of the Squig Hoppers, mostly trying to ignore the Black Orcs because they've been routed. Another Wah here at the last second, and Grimgor is just, he is going to be insurmountable at this point. It's going to take more than some Dragonback Slayers to stop him. He is definitely better than pretty much any Dwarf Lord in melee, especially the Rune Lord. And this one is going to be a very narrow victory for the Greenskins. You see that despite the fact that the Dwarf strategy getting beaten here, that they're still able to make the Greenskins earn a Pyrrhic victory in the end. Very Pyrrhic. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed these. Hope it was a bit of informative and a way for me to present a counterpoint. You're going to see more Dwarf battles from me coming up over the next couple of days. I hope you all enjoy those and that they provide some entertainment for you, or I guess that's the same thing. Provide some insight for you on how I play, and now you've seen someone else play. Again, a couple of sides to the story. HeirofCarthage signing out for now. If you all enjoyed it, get down there in the comments. Tell me what you like. Tell me what you think about the builds, about the dwarves, about my video versus these builds. Feel free to share your opinion. Happy to hear it. If you liked it, hit that like button. If you hated it, smash that hate button. And tell me why I stink. HeirofCarthage signing out for now. See you soon.